On my mother's birthday, she looked me dead in the eye, her voice like chipped ice, and said the best gift I could ever give her was to simply disappear from her life. That day, a part of me died. I was 27 years old, standing in her perfectly manicured suburban living room, the scent of lilies and betrayal thick in the air. My name is Sarah Miller, and that single sentence carved a chasm through my existence, setting me on a path I never imagined. What happened next wasn't just about leaving. It was about vanishing so completely, so utterly that the woman who birthed me would never find a trace of me again. But the real story, the one that truly changed everything, began years before that crushing declaration, in the quiet corners of a life built on a foundation of lies. Every family has its secrets, those whispered shadows that linger just out of sight. Ours, however, wasn't just a secret. It was a gaping wound, festering beneath a veneer of manufactured perfection. My mother, Eleanor, was a woman obsessed with appearances, with the pristine image of a perfect family. From the outside, we were the American dream, a beautiful house in Connecticut, a successful father, and me, their seemingly well-adjusted daughter. But behind closed doors, her obsession morphed into something far darker, a relentless control that suffocated me from childhood. I remember being 6, begging for a brightly colored dress, only to be told, "Sarah, a lady wears pastels. You wouldn't want to disappoint Mommy, would you?" Disappointment, I learned, was her most potent weapon. The first crack in my world appeared when I was a teenager, a fleeting moment of rebellion that brought the full force of her tyranny down upon me. I'd secretly tried out for a theater production at school, something she deemed frivolous, an unseemly distraction from my academic pursuits. When she found out, not from me but from a gossiping neighbor at the country club, the air in our house turned frigid. She didn't yell, she simply withdrew, freezing me out with a silence so profound it felt like a physical absence. For weeks she barely spoke, her eyes holding a silent accusation that screamed betrayal. The message was clear. My desires were secondary, irrelevant, unless they served her grand design for my life. That incident ignited a slow, burning resentment within me, a quiet ember of defiance that would smolder for years. Then came the college years, my desperate bid for freedom. I chose a university hours away, a place where I thought I could finally breathe. But even there, her influence was a long, suffocating shadow. Every phone call was an interrogation, every decision I made scrutinized. "Are you truly focusing on your pre-med studies, Sarah? Don't tell me you're wasting time with frivolous activities." The pressure was relentless, an invisible chain pulling me back to her orbit. Despite the distance, I felt her presence, a constant reminder of the life she expected me to live. The resentment deepened, twisting into a bitter knot in my stomach. The true turning point, the moment the betrayal shifted from emotional to an almost unbearable physical ache, happened during my senior year. My grandmother, my father's mother, was my only ally, the one person who saw me, truly saw me, beyond my mother's projections. She was battling a long illness, and I wanted to spend my spring break with her. My mother forbade it. "Your internship is far more important, Sarah." Grandmother understands. But grandmother didn't understand. She passed away that week, alone. I never got to say goodbye. That loss, that cruel, calculated deprivation, was a wound that refused to heal. It wasn't just about missing a goodbye. It was about my mother deliberately severing the one connection that offered me solace. The resentment had now curdled into a festering wound of betrayal. After graduation, I moved back home, a temporary measure that stretched into years. The weight of her expectations became unbearable. She'd meticulously planned my future, medical school, a prestigious residency, a marriage to a man of her choosing. Each step of her plan felt like a brick being laid on my coffin. I felt like a puppet, dancing to her strings, my own dreams shriveling into dust. The desire to break free, to reclaim my own life, became an overwhelming obsession. I started secretly saving money, taking odd jobs, anything to build a nest egg, a future that didn't involve her. And then came that birthday. Her 50th. A lavish affair she'd orchestrated down to the last detail. I'd bought her a delicate sapphire necklace, a peace offering, a desperate plea for connection. She opened the box, glanced at it, and then, with a dismissive wave of her hand, uttered those words that would forever echo in my memory. "The best gift you could give me, Sarah, is to simply disappear from my life." It wasn't anger in her eyes, not even malice. It was cold, dismissive indifference. In that instant, the resentment, the betrayal, the obsession, all converged. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a mother but a stranger, a cruel architect of my misery. A switch flipped inside me. Her words weren't a curse. They were a liberation. And I decided, right then and there, that I would give her exactly what she asked for. I would disappear. But not in the way she expected. I would vanish, yes, but my absence would become my most potent weapon. The game, I realized, had just begun. The flickering neon sign of the all-night diner cast a sickly green glow across my face, reflecting in the lukewarm coffee I nursed. Every few minutes, I'd glance at my phone, the screen dark, a mirror to the emptiness I felt inside. My name is Alex, and for 26 years I had believed in a lie, a carefully constructed illusion of family. That illusion shattered on my mother's birthday, a day that should have been filled with celebration, not the cold, cutting words that still echoed in my ears. "The best gift you could give me, Alex, is to disappear from my life." She hadn't even looked at me when she said it, her gaze fixed on the perfectly frosted cake, as if I were less significant than a misplaced napkin. Disappear. The word had lodged itself in my throat, a bitter pill I couldn't swallow. I had always been the dutiful child, the one who tried to fix things, to bridge the chasm that had always existed between my mother and me. I'd spent years chasing her approval, a phantom limb of affection that I could never quite grasp. Every achievement, every milestone, felt like a desperate plea for a warmth she simply didn't possess. I remember the time I won the regional science fair, a project I'd poured months into, hoping to finally see a flicker of pride in her eyes. Instead, she'd critiqued my choice of font on the display board. That was my mother, always finding the flaw, always reminding me I wasn't enough. Now, sitting in this desolate diner on the outskirts of Phoenix, the city that had once felt like home, I felt a strange sense of liberation mixed with a searing pain. She wanted me gone? Fine, I would vanish. But not in the way she expected. Not into oblivion, but into a new existence, one where I was no longer defined by her rejection. My car, a beat-up sedan packed with everything I owned, sat in the parking lot, a symbol of my new, uncertain freedom. The plan, if you could call it that, was simple: drive until the gas ran out, then figure it out. It was reckless, impulsive, and utterly terrifying. Yet, the thought of staying, of continuing to breathe the same air as the woman who had so casually discarded me, was far more horrifying. The first few days were a blur of cheap motels, greasy diner food, and the relentless hum of the highway. I drove east, away from the familiar desert landscape, towards something unknown. My phone remained off, a conscious decision to sever the last ties. Every mile put more distance between me and the wreckage of my past. I told myself it was for the best, that I was finally taking control. But in the quiet moments, when the engine noise faded and the darkness pressed in, the anger would surge, hot and visceral. How could a mother say such a thing to her child? How could she be so cold, so utterly devoid of empathy? One evening, I pulled into a small town in rural Arkansas, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, where everyone knew everyone else's business. The motel sign, a buzzing fluorescent monstrosity, promised clean rooms and cable TV. It was hardly luxurious, but it offered a temporary reprieve from the endless road. As I unpacked my meager belongings, a faded photograph fell from my worn wallet. It was a picture of me as a child, perhaps 5 or 6, beaming, my arm wrapped around my mother's leg, She was smiling too. A rare, genuine smile. A pang of longing, sharp and unexpected, pierced through my anger. Had that version of her ever truly existed, or was it just a trick of memory, a child's desperate need for affection? I crumpled the photo, the flimsy paper crinkling under my fingers, and tossed it into the trash can. No more looking back. No more longing for a past that was nothing but a mirage. The past was a wound, and it was time to cauterize it. The immediate goal was survival, finding a job, a place to stay. But beneath that surface-level need, a deeper, more insidious motivation was beginning to take root. It wasn't just about disappearing, it was about thriving. It was about building a life so undeniably successful, so utterly independent, that one day she would see it. One day she would regret those words. The resentment, a slow-burning ember, began to glow hotter. It wasn't enough to just disappear. I needed to prove her wrong. I needed to become someone she couldn't ignore, someone she couldn't simply erase. The thought was a dangerous one, a dark whisper in the back of my mind, but it resonated with a power I couldn't deny. This wasn't just about moving on. It was about a quiet, calculated form of retribution. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a purpose, however twisted. My mother wanted me gone. I would go. But I would return, not as the broken child she had discarded, but as something entirely new, something she would never expect. The game had just begun. The hum of the highway became my only companion, a monotonous drone that filled the silence my mother had left behind. Phoenix had shrunk in my rearview mirror, a blur of concrete and regret. Each mile widened the chasm between who I was and who I needed to become. She wanted me gone, truly gone, a ghost in her carefully curated life. But I wasn't a ghost. I was a storm gathering strength, just out of sight. The game had indeed begun, and I was playing for keeps. My first stop was a small, dusty town in rural Arizona, a place so remote it felt like time had forgotten it. I needed to disappear, not just from my mother's immediate vicinity, but from her entire world, a world where her influence felt like a suffocating blanket. I sold my beat-up sedan for a fraction of its worth, enough to buy a bus ticket to Flagstaff and a cheap burner phone. Every transaction was made with cash, every step designed to leave no digital footprint. I cut off my long hair, dyed it a stark, unfamiliar black, and started wearing clothes that made me feel invisible, blending into the background of truck stops and roadside diners. I was shedding Alex, the girl who craved her mother's approval, piece by painful piece. This wasn't just about physical transformation, it was about erasing every trace of the person she had so casually discarded. The nights were the hardest. Loneliness, a sharp physical ache, would settle in, reminding me of the life I'd abandoned. I'd lie awake in cheap motels, the hum of the ancient air conditioner a poor substitute for human connection, and the words would echo, "The best gift you could give me, Alex, is to disappear from my life." She had delivered that line with such detached cruelty, as if discussing the weather. That indifference, more than any outright anger, fueled the fire within me. It wasn't just about disappearing, it was about showing her the true cost of her wish. My journey took me north, then east, a winding path across state lines, each mile a deliberate severance. I picked up odd jobs, waitressing in greasy spoons, cleaning motel rooms, even a stint picking apples in an orchard. The work was grueling, the pay meager, but it taught me a resilience I never knew I possessed. I learned to live on instant noodles and stale bread, to sleep through the noise of restless truckers, to trust no one. Every new face was a potential threat, every kind gesture a possible trap. This new existence was harsh, unforgiving, a stark contrast to the comfortable, if emotionally barren life I'd left behind. But it was also mine, entirely. She had no claim on it, no power over it. One evening, while working a late shift at a diner in rural Oklahoma, an old man, a regular who always ordered black coffee and read the same worn newspaper, struck up a conversation. He talked about his own estranged daughter, about regret, about the things people do and say that they can never take back. His words, laced with genuine sorrow, hit a nerve. I felt a flicker of something akin to empathy, a dangerous emotion in my new, hardened state. But then I remembered she. Her cold eyes, her dismissive tone, and the flicker died. There would be no regret for her, no sorrow, only the consequences of her actions. I began to meticulously plan my return, not as a desperate plea, but as a calculated strike. I needed resources, leverage. My mother was obsessed with her image, her social standing, the pristine facade she presented to the world. That was her vulnerability, her Achilles heel. I started researching, using public libraries and burner laptops, delving into the obscure corners of the internet. I learned about her business dealings, her charity work, the influential circles she moved in. The more I dug, the more cracks I found in her perfect veneer. There were whispers of questionable investments, rumors of backroom deals, hushed conversations about a past she desperately tried to bury. The resentment that had simmered within me began to morph into something colder, more focused. It wasn't just about proving a point. It was about dismantling her carefully constructed world, brick by brick. My mother had always prided herself on her impeccable reputation, her unblemished public persona. That was the most precious thing she possessed, far more valuable than any affection she could ever offer a child. I realized then that the best revenge wasn't just disappearing. It was reappearing in a way that would shatter everything she held dear. She had wanted me gone, out of sight, out of mind. But I was becoming a shadow, an unseen force gathering information, biding my time. The silence from her end was deafening, confirming her indifference. But it also gave me the space I needed to transform. I was no longer Alex, the supplicant daughter. I was a weapon, forged in her rejection, waiting for the precise moment to strike. The game had truly begun, and the stakes were rising. The diner's stale air still clung to me, but the phoenix sun, relentless even at dawn, seemed to strip away the last vestiges of my old self. I had driven all night, the highway a ribbon of black unwinding beneath the tires, each mile a deliberate severance from the life she had so casually discarded. My phone, once a constant tether to her world, remained dark, a symbol of my new, self-imposed isolation. I wasn't just disappearing. I was erasing myself from her narrative, preparing to write my own. My first stop wasn't a job fair or a cheap motel, but a public library. The internet was my weapon now, and anonymity my shield. I spent hours hunched over a dusty keyboard, diving into the murky waters of online public records. My goal was simple: understand her world, her vulnerabilities, her hidden currents, without ever touching the surface. I started with the obvious, her business. She owned a small but lucrative chain of boutique bakeries, built on a reputation for artisanal bread and decadent pastries. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her empire was built on sweetness, while her heart was bitter. I uncovered financial statements, supplier lists, employee rosters. It was all public information, but piecing it together felt like assembling a complex puzzle, each fragment revealing a new angle of her carefully curated existence. Her success was undeniable, her brand impeccable. But beneath the polished facade, I started to see cracks. A recent loan taken out against her flagship store, a surprisingly large sum. A new, unlisted property acquisition in a prime downtown location, purchased under a shell corporation. These weren't the actions of a woman comfortably expanding her empire. They hinted at a desperate scramble, a hidden pressure. The resentment, a familiar companion, began to morph into something colder, more calculating. She had always made me feel like a burden, an expense. Yet here she was, making moves that suggested she was the one struggling, fighting to maintain an image. The thought brought a grim satisfaction. I wasn't just going to disappear, I was going to understand the precise mechanics of her world, then dismantle it brick by painful brick. My next move was to secure a place to stay, not a permanent residence, but a temporary hideout, I found a small, nondescript apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, far enough to be invisible, close enough to observe. My savings, meticulously hoarded from years of part-time jobs and a small inheritance from my grandmother, were enough for a few months. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine, untainted by her influence. I bought a cheap burner phone, a laptop, and a stack of notebooks. My new life was about to begin, a life dedicated to a single, burning purpose. The days blurred into a routine of meticulous research. I delved deeper into her business, cross-referencing public records with online reviews, local news articles, and even employee forums. I discovered a pattern of high employee turnover in her bakeries, whispers of an autocratic management style, and a surprising number of lawsuits filed by former staff regarding unpaid wages and hostile work environments. She had successfully buried most of these, but the digital breadcrumbs remained, waiting to be followed. One evening, I stumbled upon a forum post from a former pastry chef, detailing a particularly egregious incident involving a massive order for a high-profile charity gala. The chef claimed she had sabotaged the order, blaming it on the staff to avoid paying them, then secretly fulfilled it herself using cheaper ingredients, pocketing the difference. It was a small detail, easily dismissed, but it resonated with the manipulative streak I knew so well. This wasn't just about business, it was about her character, her willingness to exploit anyone for personal gain. The betrayal I felt wasn't new, but this was a different kind. It wasn't the personal slight of a mother rejecting her child, it was the cold, calculated deception of a businesswoman. It deepened my resolve, turning the abstract desire for revenge into a concrete mission. I wasn't just seeking emotional retribution, I was seeking justice for all the people she had wronged, the countless individuals whose lives she had impacted with her ruthless ambition. I started to build a network, not of friends, but of information sources. I joined online communities for disgruntled former employees, posing as a curious job seeker. I frequented forums for small business owners, gathering intelligence on industry practices and common pitfalls. I even spent hours in local coffee shops just listening, picking up fragments of conversations about the local business scene. My world shrank to this singular obsession, every action, every thought, directed towards understanding her vulnerabilities. The game had indeed begun, and I was no longer a pawn. I was a player, meticulously studying the board, anticipating her moves, and preparing my own. My mother wanted me gone. Soon she would realize that my disappearance was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her. The stakes were rising, and I was ready to play for keeps. The first real tremor of doubt hit me when I saw the headline. It was a local Phoenix paper, one I'd subscribed to online under a fake name, just to keep tabs. Prominent philanthropist's charity under scrutiny. The philanthropist, of course, was she, my mother. The article was vague, hinting at irregularities and unusual expenditures, but the implication was clear. Someone was digging. My heart, which had been a cold, hard stone for months, gave a strange, almost painful lurch. This wasn't my doing. Not yet. I had spent the last few months meticulously building my new life, or rather, dismantling hers. Every cent I'd saved, every hour I'd worked, had been channeled into one singular purpose: understanding her world, her vulnerabilities. I'd learned about her charity, a sprawling organization that funded art programs for underprivileged youth. On the surface, it was impeccable, a testament to her public persona, but I knew better. I knew the cracks always appeared, given enough pressure. This article, though, was too soon. My plan was still in its nascent stages, a slow burn designed to unravel her carefully constructed empire brick by brick. This felt like an accelerant, poured by an unknown hand. A cold wave of unease washed over me. Had someone else picked up on my scent? Was there another player in this twisted game? The thought was unsettling, yet it also ignited a perverse thrill. The stakes truly were rising, and I was no longer the only one playing. I dove deeper, spending sleepless nights poring over public records, news archives, and even obscure financial filings. I discovered that the irregularities mentioned in the paper were linked to a series of shell corporations, funneling money from the charity into private accounts. Her private accounts. The sheer audacity of it made my stomach churn. She wasn't just neglectful, she was a thief, exploiting the very people she claimed to help. The resentment I felt morphed into something colder, sharper. This wasn't about a mother who didn't love her child anymore. This was about a woman who had built her entire life on lies, and I was going to be the one to expose them. The next few weeks were a blur of caffeine and code. I wasn't a hacker, but I learned. I learned how to navigate the dark corners of the internet, how to find information that wasn't meant to be found. I traced the money, following a convoluted trail that led from the charity, through a labyrinth of offshore accounts, and finally, back to a series of high-end real estate purchases in her name. A luxury condo in Miami, a sprawling ranch in Montana, a private jet, all funded by the generosity of her charity. The betrayal was a bitter taste in my mouth. All those years she'd lectured me about financial responsibility, about the importance of giving back, while she was systematically looting the very institution meant to embody those values. The anger simmered, a constant companion. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every child who didn't get a scholarship because she needed another vacation home. Then came the anonymous email. It was short, cryptic, and sent from an untraceable address. You're not the only one who sees her for what she is. Be careful, she has eyes everywhere. My blood ran cold. Someone knew what I was doing, or at least what I was contemplating. Was it a warning, a threat, or an invitation? The thought of an ally, someone who shared my burning desire for justice, was a dangerous temptation. But trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not now. Not ever. I doubled down on my efforts, working with a frantic energy I hadn't known I possessed. I compiled a dossier. A thick file filled with irrefutable evidence, bank statements, property deeds, shell company registrations. Each document was a nail in her coffin, a testament to her hypocrisy. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was the weapon I needed. This was how I would make her disappear from her own life, just as she had wished for me. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place one rainy Tuesday night. I found a series of emails, buried deep within a forgotten server, detailing a systematic falsification of donor records. She wasn't just siphoning money, she was fabricating donations to inflate her charity's reported income, securing larger grants and tax breaks. It was a house of cards, built on a foundation of deceit, and I held the match. The obsession had fully consumed me. Sleep was a luxury, food an afterthought. My world had shrunk to the glowing screen of my laptop, the endless scroll of financial data, the cold, hard facts that painted a damning portrait of the woman who was supposed to be my mother. The idea of justice, of seeing her stripped bare of her carefully constructed facade, was the only thing that kept me going. I knew what I had to do. The time for subtlety was over. The game had escalated, and I was ready for the final play. I drafted a detailed report, attaching every shred of evidence, every damning email, every fraudulent transaction. My fingers trembled slightly as I prepared to send it. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about exposing a fraud, about protecting the innocent, about finally, truly being free. The moment of reckoning was upon us. The email sent, a cold wave of adrenaline washed over me, replacing the tremor in my hands with a strange, unsettling calm. This wasn't just about my mother, this was about every person she had ever manipulated, every life she had touched with her toxic ambition. I had given them the rope, now they would decide whether to hang her with it. The waiting began, an agonizing suspension between the past and an unknown future. Days bled into nights, each news alert, each unread email, a potential harbinger of the storm I had unleashed. I found myself obsessively checking financial news sites, legal blogs, anything that might hint at the earthquake I knew was coming. Then, the first tremor. A small article, buried deep in the business section of a local paper, mentioned an internal audit at her firm, citing unusual discrepancies. My breath hitched. It was starting. The dominoes were beginning to fall. I imagined her, pacing her opulent office, her meticulously coiffed hair perhaps a little disheveled, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. A bitter, almost triumphant smile touched my lips. She had built her empire on sand, and I had just introduced the tide. The next call came from an investigative journalist, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, whose name I recognized from hard-hitting exposés. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Alex?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional. "I received some intriguing information. Are you the source?" I confirmed it, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. We spoke for hours, my narrative weaving through the intricate web of deceit she had spun. I detailed the shell corporations, the phantom clients, the inflated invoices, every meticulous detail I had uncovered. Sarah was sharp, asking pointed questions, connecting dots I hadn't even realized were there. She promised to dig deeper, to verify everything, and to protect my anonymity. The story broke a week later, not in a local paper, but on a national news outlet. Corporate scandal rocks Phoenix firm. CEO under scrutiny for alleged fraud. My mother's face, usually so composed and unyielding, stared out from the screen, a pixelated image of a woman whose carefully cultivated world was crumbling. The article was damning, citing my anonymous source extensively, detailing the years of financial manipulation, the blatant disregard for ethical conduct. It wasn't just about the numbers. It painted a picture of a ruthless individual who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted, regardless of the cost to others. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Social media exploded with outrage. Former clients came forward with their own stories of being swindled, and legal experts weighed in on the severity of the charges. The firm's stock plummeted, investors panicked, and the board of directors initiated an emergency meeting. I watched it all unfold from a quiet distance, a spectator to the conflagration I had ignited. There was no joy in it, not truly. Only a profound sense of exhaustion, a quiet satisfaction that justice, however imperfect, was finally being served. The phone rang, an unknown number. My stomach churned. I knew instinctively who it was. I let it ring, watching the screen flicker with her name. It rang again, and again. On the fifth call I answered. Her voice, usually so controlled, was a raw, guttural whisper, laced with a venom I had never heard directed so openly at me. "Alex," she hissed. "What have you done?" "I gave you the gift you asked for, Mother," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. "I disappeared, and in doing so, I finally found myself." Her furious silence stretched, punctuated only by her ragged breathing. "You ruined me," she finally choked out, the words laced with disbelief, as if the concept of consequences was alien to her. "No," I said, a wave of profound weariness washing over me. "You ruined yourself." I merely held up a mirror. The line went dead. I held the phone, the silence on the other end echoing the emptiness I had carried for so long. It was over. The fight, the chase, the desperate need for validation. All of it was finally, irrevocably, over. The resolution wasn't a triumphant explosion, but a quiet implosion, a dismantling of a toxic legacy. The cost had been immense, the journey fraught with pain. But as I looked out at the vast, indifferent desert sky, a fragile sense of peace began to settle over me. The bitter taste of resentment was fading, replaced by the bittersweet realization that freedom often comes at a price. That fragile peace, however, was a luxury I couldn't yet afford. The desert, for all its stark beauty, offered no true escape from the echoes of my past. My mother, she had demanded my disappearance, and I had given it to her, but the bitter taste of resentment still lingered, a phantom limb of the emotional pain she'd inflicted. The freedom I felt was less liberation and more a desolate emptiness, a void where a family should have been. Every mile I drove away from Phoenix, every town I passed through, only amplified the quiet hum of my unresolved anger. This wasn't resolution, It was merely a retreat. I needed to confront the source of that pain, not just outrun it. The thought had been a nagging whisper, growing louder with each passing day. My mother had always used her words as weapons, cutting deeper than any physical blow. Her demand for my disappearance wasn't just a rejection, it was a final, brutal dismissal of my entire existence. I had to understand why. Not for her, but for me. To finally sever the invisible chains that bound me to her toxic narrative. The decision solidified somewhere in the vast expanse of New Mexico, under a sky so immense it dwarfed all my personal dramas. I would go back, not to beg, not to reconcile, but to demand answers. I would face she one last time, not as the desperate child seeking approval, but as the woman she had inadvertently forged through her cruelty. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, no grand scheme of public humiliation. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, about finally telling her, to her face, that her words no longer held power over me. The drive back felt different. The car, once a symbol of escape, now felt like a chariot carrying me towards a reckoning. I pictured the scene repeatedly in my mind, her surprise, her probable disdain, my unwavering resolve. I wasn't naive enough to expect an apology, or even an acknowledgement of her cruelty. She was incapable of such introspection. But I needed to speak my truth, to finally articulate the pain she had inflicted, not for her to hear, but for me to say. When I pulled up to her meticulously manicured house, the same house where she had uttered those devastating words, a strange calm settled over me. No shaking hands, no racing heart, just a quiet determination. The front door, once a barrier to her affection, now felt like a mere formality. I rang the bell, the sound echoing unnervingly loud in the afternoon stillness. She opened the door, her eyes widening in a flicker of surprise before her usual mask of indifference slid back into place. "Alex," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "I thought I made myself clear." "You did," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil that had once consumed me. "You told me to disappear." And I did. For a while. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over her, taking in her perfectly coiffed hair, her expensive clothes, the carefully constructed facade of her life. "I realized something out there, Mom. Disappearing wasn't about you. It was about me. About finding out who I was without your constant judgment, your endless criticism." Her lips thinned. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't," I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. "You never did. Every achievement, every success, every moment I tried to share with you, it was never enough. It was always about the font on the Syank. Project, wasn't it? Never the hours I poured into it. Never the passion. Just the flaw." My voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in a raw, aching truth. "You broke me, Mom, piece by piece for years, and on your birthday you delivered the final blow. You told me the best gift I could give you was to vanish." Her face remained impassive, a blank canvas of indifference. This was the wall I had always crashed against. But this time, I wasn't trying to break through it. I was merely stating a fact. "I came back," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Not because I want anything from you. Not your approval, not your love, not even an apology. I came back to tell you that your words for so long defined me. They were the chains around my ankles. But I cut them. I am no longer that little girl desperate for your affection. I am free of you." A flicker of something, was it surprise, confusion, crossed her face, quickly replaced by her usual disdain. "You're being dramatic, Alex." "As always." "Perhaps," I conceded, a small genuine smile touching my lips. "But it's my drama now, not yours. And the best part? I don't need your permission to live it. You wanted me gone? Fine. But I'm not gone into oblivion. I'm gone into my own life. A life you will never be a part of again." I turned, leaving her standing in the doorway, her perfectly composed world briefly fractured by the truth I had laid bare. Walking away from her house that day, a profound shift occurred within me. The bitter taste of resentment was finally gone. Replaced, not by triumph, but by a quiet, resolute peace. The freedom I had glimpsed in the desert was no longer fragile, it was solid, earned. The price had been immense, yes, but the cost of staying, of continuing to chase a love that would never be given, would have been far greater. I drove away, not looking back, knowing that this time, my disappearance was truly my own. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic beeping of the heart monitor. My mother's eyes, once so cold and dismissive, now held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Fear, perhaps, or even a ghost of recognition. The doctor, a young man with tired eyes, spoke softly about irreversible damage, about the choices she had made, about the consequences. He didn't know the half of it. He didn't know the years of quiet anguish, the slow erosion of my spirit, the constant battle to simply exist in her shadow. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the monster who had banished me, but a frail, broken woman. The venom that had fueled me for so long, the burning obsession to make her feel a fraction of the pain she inflicted, began to dissipate. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a gradual cooling, like embers dying after a raging fire. My hand, which I had clenched into a fist so many times, ready to strike back with words or deeds, now lay open, empty. The justice I had craved, the moment of reckoning I had meticulously planned, felt hollow. She was a shell, and my triumph, if you could even call it that, tasted like ash. The ultimate revenge, I realized, wasn't her suffering. It was my freedom. It was the ability to stand in that sterile hospital room, looking at the woman who had defined so much of my pain, and feel nothing but a quiet, profound sense of release. I remembered the birthday, the day she looked at me with such disdain and declared the best gift would be my absence. That memory, once a fresh wound, now felt distant, almost like a story I'd read in a book. The betrayal had cut deep, leaving a gaping hole in my heart, but I had filled it. Not with bitterness, but with resilience. I had built a life, brick by painful brick, without her. I had found love, forged friendships, and discovered a strength within myself I never knew existed. My husband Michael stood beside me, his hand a warm, steady presence on my back. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was a testament to the life I had created, a life she knew nothing about. He represented everything she had tried to deny me: happiness, acceptance, unconditional love. The nurse came in, her movements gentle as she adjusted the IV drip. She glanced at me, a silent question in her gaze. I simply shook my head. There was nothing left to say. No accusations, no demands, no final goodbyes. The goodbye had happened years ago, on her birthday, when she had slammed the door on our relationship. Leaving the hospital, the crisp autumn air felt invigorating. The weight I had carried for so long, the burden of her hatred and my own need for retribution, finally lifted. It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood ending, no grand confrontation or tearful reconciliation. It was quieter, more profound. It was the understanding that true justice wasn't about inflicting pain, but about reclaiming peace. I had spent years consumed by resentment, then betrayal, and finally, a relentless obsession for justice. Now, standing on the sidewalk, watching the leaves fall, I finally understood bittersweet closure. The cost had been immense, years lost to anger, a childhood overshadowed by a mother's cruelty. Yet, the lesson learned was invaluable. My mother's actions intended to break me had instead forged me into someone stronger, someone who knew the true value of love and self-worth. I looked at Michael, a genuine smile gracing my lips. "Let's go home," I said, my voice light, unburdened. The word home no longer carried the sting of rejection. It was a place of warmth, of belonging, a place I had built for myself, far away from the shadows of my past. My journey had been long and arduous, but I had finally arrived. I was free,